Which loser from 2023 has the best chance of going worst to first in 2024? What's going on, football fans? It's Mitch back here with another NFL rankings video. And in this video, I'm ranking all the bottom of the barrel teams from last season, discussing each team in depth, giving you an optimistic view of each team, and discussing why they might be able to go worst to first in 2024. This year, it doesn't appear that there are many candidates to truly actually make that jump, but that's why we all watch the games, because it's definitely possible. Gronk, spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more NFL rankings just like this. And let me know in the comments, which team or teams do you believe can go worst to first in 2024? That means they were the worst team in their division in 2023, and they can be the best team in 2024. Or even if you just think they might be worst to playoffs, also let me know in the comment section below, and I will clarify that as well in this video. So this is ranking the likeliness of each team going worst to first in their division. Let's discuss the bottom teams from last year. The team that is least likely to go worst to first in 2024 is the Washington Commanders. Why the Washington Commanders? Well, more than other teams, they have a fresh start in Washington. Truly a fresh start. Pretty much new ownership, new quarterback, new coach. And those could be good things, right? If you're looking at the optimistic viewpoint. But how often does a team with a new coach, basically new ownership, a new regime entirely, quarterback included, who is a rookie, and last year was not a very good team, had the second overall pick in the draft, right? How often does that team overcome two teams in their division that made the playoffs last year, a team that was the number 2 seed last year in their conference, the Dallas Cowboys, and a team that made the Super Bowl the year before, the Philadelphia Eagles? Both teams would be slightly surprising if neither made the playoffs, and would definitely be pretty surprising if the Commanders were better than both of these teams. Could the Commanders be better than the Cowboys? Maybe. Could they be better than just the Eagles? Maybe. But both? That would take a lot, right? Including even being better than the Giants, which last year they were not. So it would take a little bit there. So that's why they're least likely. But let's discuss what I actually like about the Commanders, and let's look at the optimism for Washington, right? So first of all, I think they've improved at head coach. I think Dan Quinn is significantly a better defensive-minded guy for this NFL than Ron Rivera. I think he's going to help this defense. I think he's going to help put guys like Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne in the right positions to succeed. Those fundamental superstar players of that defense from the last couple of years. That interior duo is still one of the best in football. And when you have an interior duo like that, they can dictate both in the pass rush and the run defense, which is going to help your entire defense. And a smart defensive coach like Dan Quinn can certainly put you in the right positions and upgrade your defense across the board. Run defense, pass defense, and just overall fundamentals, which I think Dan Quinn immediately did that with a defense in Dallas that many looked at the year that he came in as pretty underwhelming from a talent standpoint, pretty young, a lot of unknowns. And he was immediately able to turn that around. He also has a more aggressive style than we've seen in the past in Atlanta. If you're not caught up with what Dan Quinn has changed about his defense, largely he has shifted from more of a zone base, cover 3 base, to more of a man base, cover 1 base. And he's shifted a lot in terms of his fronts as well, and he's been more dynamic and versatile within his defense, which is nice to see his growth from head coach in Atlanta, defensive coordinator in Seattle, to shifting his identity, moving away from the NFL, coming back to the NFL, and finding out what works now. And I feel like he's been at the forefront the last couple of years. So he's going to help that defense. On top of that, I think he has many chess pieces on that side of the ball to utilize within his defense. I love the pickup of Jeremy Chin. I think he's an underrated player that they got for not so much money from Carolina. He's somebody that's played nickel, strong safety in the box. He can float around in the deep area of the field. He's a big safety. He looks like a linebacker. He is kind of like a Keanu Neal type vibe for Dan Quinn. So intrigued by that pickup. I actually think in general the safeties are pretty underrated in Washington. You look at Jeremy Reeves, who I think deserves more playing time. Derek Forrest is another. And then in the front seven, I love the addition of Frankie Louvu. I think he's been one of the best linebackers in football the last couple of years. And what I especially love about his skill set when it comes to Dan Quinn is Dan Quinn loves those blitzing hybrid edge linebacker players like Micah Parsons, right? That was the key to that defense in Dallas, the explosion of Micah Parsons and utilizing him correctly in that defense. And while Frankie Louvu is not the athlete Micah Parsons is, he can play stand-up backer and play coverage. He can play the run, and he can rush off the edge, which gives you a lot of different things, along with having Bobby Wagner to back him up. If he moves to the edge, Frankie Louvu, well, then all of a sudden, Bobby Wagner's still your middle linebacker. So you've got a lot of versatility within that. You still got a first-round pick in Jamin Davis there, who hasn't exactly panned out, but still pretty talented kid. Maybe can take a step forward in a new defense. You never really know. Dorrance Armstrong was a solid pickup. I don't think their edge rush is fantastic, but I do think that they've improved their overall front seven. Jerzon Newton, the second-round pick, should certainly help depth. Dante Fowler can rush the passer at times. Clelin Ferrell can set the edge. Even looking at the back end of the defense, I think that's where the biggest questions lie. But Michael Davis has always been kind of a favorite of mine. He has gotten a little bit older, but I think used correctly, he's a solid number 2 corner. They also picked up a pretty versatile defensive back in the second round in, a safety DB nickel hybrid that could also help them right away, which certainly was one of their sore spots. So, and then they got Quan Martin from a year ago, who I like. Emmanuel Forbes is a bit of a question mark, maybe a bust, but you never know changing schemes how that may help. So defensively, I think Washington will be better just in terms of fundamentally sound. I don't necessarily think they have a ton of talent, which is where I'm not projecting them, again, to win the division. This is definitely the lowest team that I have faith in doing so. But I feel like they at least have the pieces in place to grow on that side of the ball. And they're very, very young, which is interesting. On the offensive side of the ball, it comes down to Cliff Kingsbury and Jaden Daniels. And it really comes down to that combination, along with can they just get a professional offensive line in front of this young quarterback? That is my biggest worry and my lack of faith in this team when it comes to a quarterback that is smaller, is a little bit chaotic in play style, and does need a pocket to throw from. And you've got an offensive line that is pretty suspect. Andrew Wiley might be solid, kind of underrated at times. Sam Cosmi has been there for a while, not a great player, not a bad player, I would say. Nick Allegretti started in the Super Bowl for the Chiefs, I believe. He's a very solid player at guard, but not like an ideal top-end starter. That's why he was let go by the Chiefs and was a backup for a majority of the year. Tyler Biadasz is an okay center who they just signed. Cornelius Lucas is an okay tackle. They did draft Brandon Coleman, but overall, you look at the offensive line, it's solid. There's not really a bad player here, but there's not really a good player here either, which definitely gives me worry. I think their receivers are pretty dynamic. I've always liked Terry McLaurin. He's an elite player in my opinion. Jahan Dotson is a very good player and should ascend this year in a new offense. Luke McCaffrey is very intriguing to me. And then even De'Ami Brown's been interesting the last year or two. And then Austin Eckler comes in at professionalism, leadership, not exactly the same player he used to be. Brian Robinson is a warrior. Marcus Mariota gives him a solid backup. I think that their floor has risen from a year ago. I think the intrigue around this team has risen. I think their potential long-term is there. But it really comes down to, okay, Jaden Daniels within this Cliff Kingsbury offense, how's that going to look? Is he going to be Kyler Murray-esque? Is he going to be running the football? How often is he going to be running the football? Is it spread? Is it air raid? Is it Daniels a lot of outside the numbers throws, kind of like at LSU, spreading the defense out, allowing him to read the defense, using those receiver talents? But then if the pocket implodes, you've got to have a lot of quick passes because that offensive line is not very good. But then how much of a running game can you get out of that? I thought Cliff's running game in Arizona was a bit inconsistent, but sometimes kind of underrated. So intrigued to see that as well. Tight end position is not the greatest. Signing Zach Ertz for a season. The old man can barely run, but he knows where to go and where to be against zone coverage. Ben Sinnot's pretty interesting, but I don't expect him to see too many snaps in his early days in the NFL. But I feel like the Commanders are a team that I'll be more intrigued to actually watch this year, maybe, just because I have more respect for the coaches. I think they're more fun. I think they bring a different scheme to the table on both sides of the ball that I think gives them an edge in certain games. But I also feel like it could go really bad. And I feel like Jaden Daniels was not the right pick at number 2 overall. As I've said many times, I'm a Drake May guy. And obviously it helps that I'm a Patriots fan, but I was a Drake May guy before the draft. So I don't know how Jaden Daniels is going to fare in the NFL. I think he'll be a solid player, but I'm not sure how it might go without the elite supporting cast immediately at the NFL level. It's going to be tough. I feel like it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster, so brace yourselves for that. But the upside with the Commanders does exist. If they can figure out the offensive line, if they can figure out the pass rush, and I know those are huge question marks, and Jaden Daniels can play well as a rookie, this is a team that might be able to shock some people, but I just don't see how they're going to be able to be better than both the Eagles and the Cowboys. So that's why they're the worst team in terms of their chances of making the playoffs and going worst to first. So the next team, or the number 7 ranked team in terms of their ability to go worst to first, that is the Arizona Cardinals, Cliff Kingsbury's former team. So interesting segue there. Now, the appeal of Arizona, I think, is that they have Kyler Murray, okay? And not just Kyler Murray, but in my opinion, an offense that I think in their best outing, on their best day, in their best game, they can go toe-to-toe with pretty much any offense in the league. So that allows Arizona to win a lot of shootouts. But my biggest issue with Arizona, 2 things about going worst to first. First, they have arguably the least talented defense on paper in the NFL. And no matter how many times I say this to the Cardinals fans, they don't believe me, so it doesn't really matter. But secondly, they play in one of the toughest divisions in the league. And you could see all 3 of the teams that were better than them last year being better than them again this year, and Arizona once again finishing last in their division. And it just feels like they're a little too early to the party. Like, the Cardinals are not quite there yet. And Cardinals fans are very excited for this season because they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. Kyler's going to be healthy the whole year. It's year 2 of the coaching staff, right? They've got many interesting players, including Trey McBride, who I think could be a future stud in this league. They had multiple first-round picks. There's a lot of reason to be excited about the Cardinals, and I don't want to take that away from Arizona fans, and I'm not trying to be a hater, guys. It's just that Seattle, I have respect for. I think they've done some great things this offseason. I think they were a better team last year, and that is facts. I think that San Francisco is probably the best team in the NFC and the most talented team in the NFC, and the chances of Arizona being better than them really only comes down to injuries. And then the Rams, I feel like they've got McVay and Stafford, and if Stafford is healthy, they're going to be a better team. They have a really good offense. So to me, it's like, could Arizona maybe be better than Seattle? That could happen, just straight up. Could they just be better than Seattle? No injuries, nothing? Yeah, that could happen. Could Stafford get hurt for 8 games and the Cardinals, outpace and out-record the Rams? Absolutely. That is actually possible. Could the Niners fall off this year with a Super Bowl hangover and Purdy maybe gets hurt again? Possibly. But even the Niners, that a Super Bowl hangover might be 9 wins, right? So 10 wins. So like, if Purdy gets hurt, then maybe we're talking about 7. But the thing with that is, like, are all 3 of those things going to happen? Probably not. But diving into the Cardinals and being optimistic here, I think we could see potentially one of the best offenses in the league, right? Like Marvin Harrison Jr. could immediately be a Pro Bowl level receiver. I think he has that translatable ability to the NFL. He is an amazing hands catcher. His body control, his ability to track down the football is phenomenal. He gives them a DeAndre Hopkins type that they had a couple of years ago where Kyler can rely on that guy to start drives, to end drives, to score touchdowns, to move the chains. He is that type of alpha target, and he will be immediately, in my opinion. Now, will he be like a top 10 receiver in the NFL? Probably unlikely, but he'll probably be really, really good. So that is a big thing, and that's not something they had last year, right? Even Hollywood Brown, who is a very solid receiver, was not that type of true number one, more of a fancy number two, right? So Marvin Harrison Jr. is a big optimism point. Trey McBride being a top 10 tight end in football is very realistic, in my opinion. He has all the skills. He's very good after the catch. He has a great competitive nature to him. I think he's physical. I think he's got great hands. He's a better athlete than I think people give him credit for. Kyler ascending back to top 10 status as a quarterback is certainly possible. I think he's been there at one point in his career, but oftentimes he's been too inconsistent to remain there. I think when healthy, and at his best, yes, I think the roadrunner style that he brings is completely unique to him. His arm strength, his ability to have fluid movement inside, outside the pocket, his accuracy on the move is exquisite, right? Kyler, if he's locked in, can be really good and take over games, but his inconsistencies at times in terms of reading the field, in terms of decision making, in terms of maybe holding the ball too long. There are things about his game, seeing the middle of the field. There are things about his game that are kind of negatives, but at the same time, he is one of those quarterbacks that can take over games, so you have to give them a chance there. The offensive line, I do think, is probably the most underrated aspect of their team. I really like Jonah Williams, that signing. Christian Jones, I think, was a great draft pick. Isaiah Adams was a solid draft pick. Neither will probably start this year, but I really like that depth for them, and as well as Kelvin Beachum, who's a solid tackle as a swing guy. Paris Johnson in year 2 should ascend, you would think. Solid in year 1. Evan Brown is okay. Froholt is fine, not great. I thought Will Hernandez played great last year. Greg Dortch at slot receiver, I think super underrated. Love him. Love me some Dortch. I think Zay Jones is a solid pickup for the outside. And Michael Wilson, if he's playing, is an interesting year 2 receiver who could take a jump as well. So this offense, James Conner, can't forget to mention him. DJ Dallas, Michael Carter, they've got plenty of depth here. DeMarcado played last year. That's how you say his name. And Trey Benson is really explosive as a rookie. So Desmond Ridder is the backup, which gives them a little bit better kind of a floor to this team. So I definitely see how this team is better on offense. There's no doubt about it, especially if Kyler's playing the entire year. And for fans to debate me about their record, that is entirely fair. The thing that I find difficult about them is, again, the division, the competition, the schedule. All those things are difficult to see where they're going to pick up more wins than last year. I think they can maybe win 2 more, somewhere around that range, but it's going to be difficult for them to go from the worst to the first, considering their defense. I look at their defense and I say, I don't see a single elite player on their entire defense. The only one that's anywhere close is Budda Baker. And Budda Baker has not been the same guy, in my opinion, the last year or 2. He's still good, but I think he's not elite, okay? So you look at this defense, Darius Robinson, they drafted in the first round. I thought that was a solid pick, but to me, he's not a true 10-sack guy, and I don't know if he'll ever be in the NFL level. I think he's a good inside, outside defensive end type of player. He gives you versatility to your defense, but is he a Dwight Freeney? Is he a Julius Peppers? Is he one of those type of he's every season of his career, TJ Watt, Khalil Mack, is he going to go out there and get you 10, 12 sacks? Probably not, right? Is he Nick Bosa? Absolutely not. He's solid. Ideally he could be like a Trey Flowers, in my opinion. That's just a Patriots name to throw out there. But Bilal Nichols, he's whatever. That pickup was whatever. I guess it boosts the floor of the defense, but it doesn't really do much to change my mind on the defense. Justin Jones is another one where it's he hasn't been very good the last few years. I don't really understand that signing. Zaven Collins is okay, but he hasn't really found his position yet. It feels like edge maybe over linebacker. I'm not sure. Kaiser White, I think that was a nice signing for them last year, and he played well. I like the Mac Wilson signing. But again, he was like a specialist on New England. Like, he was a third down player, sometimes on the edge, sometimes at linebacker, sometimes he was on special teams, but he wasn't a regular player. Barnes is a solid run defender. Ojulari is an okay pass rusher, but it's been pretty inconsistent early, especially I think with injuries, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaking him for his brother. But Max Melton, I really like that pick. But again, rookie, second-round pick. It's going to have, some time to grow there. And he's expecting him to start is difficult. Jalen Thompson's a pretty good player. Sean Murphy-Bunting is an okay, more of a number 2, number 3 corner. Garrett Williams is whatever, right? Like, none of these guys this is like one of the weaker secondaries at corner in the league. I like their draft picks, Elijah Jones and Max Melton, but if they're starting, they have to be great right away. Are they going to be great right away? I don't know. Linebacker, I think, is kind of underrated for the Cardinals. I think edge is definitely one of the worst in football, and interior defensive line still has room to grow. So, they're kind of a one-sided team in my mind. I think their coaching is okay. It's solid. I think Betsing is pretty solid. I really liked his play calling at times last year, especially when they had Josh Dobbs. I thought that they did a really good job of managing a pretty underwhelming quarterback. And at head coach, Jonathan Gannon did a pretty good job with the defense at times, but near the end of the year, they started to get kind of dismantled. So the Cardinals are one of those teams. I just feel like they're maybe a year away from really being like in contention for the playoffs. But I think there's more of a vision for certain people out there, fans out there, to see how they could make that jump because of their offense. And I certainly understand that more so than a Washington. Okay, the next team is my New England Patriots, the number 6 team that could go worst to first. Now, the Patriots, I think it's really going to come down to the quarterback position, because the New England Patriots, they probably have one of the 5 best defenses in the league. So when we're talking about how can you go worst to first, last year, despite missing Matt Judon and Christian Gonzalez, arguably their best corner and their best pass rusher, 2 of the most important players on their entire team, they still ended up being top 3 in the NFL in EPA allowed. They were the best defense over the last 7 weeks of the season. They had a stretch of the calendar where they barely scored any points and they barely lost any games, right? Like, in terms of they barely lost. Like, there was a game they lost 7-0. There was a game they lost 10-3. There was a game. So, New England's defense is very good, and that's going to allow them to stay in a lot of games. Now, what if Drake May is this year's CJ Stroud? What if Drake May is a Dak Prescott type rookie season? What if Drake May is Mac Jones from 2021? Could this team potentially be a really underrated team? And that is pretty, possible in my mind. Now, the thing that's not very possible is, can they overcome their division, right? They've got to beat out Josh Allen and the Bills, a team that does appear to be maybe declining, but still very, very solid. The Jets, super talented. Now, the Jets are one of those teams that kind of disqualify themselves at times. Like, Aaron Rodgers could get hurt. Their coaching is a disaster at times, but they do have a super talented team. So you have to overcome that. Miami, they are more flawed than last year. I think Tua, kind of an injury waiting to happen at times, and their offensive line and defensive lines are pretty suspect. So you look at New England and you say, I think it's more likely than Arizona, just because they have a really good defense. I know what I'm getting there. Gerard Mayo is still there. And yeah, Belichick's gone, but let's be fair. Belichick was not Belichick the last couple of years, and anyone that watched the team would know that. The offense should be better from a schematic standpoint, you would think. Just the last couple of years has been pretty vanilla and pretty basic and pretty underwhelming. And now they gain that Cleveland offense. And I feel like the run game will be better. The offensive line play, you would think, would be better, and then the receiving core does have more talent. It's not elite talent, but they added a couple draft picks. They added a KJ Osborne. They still got Hunter Henry. They got Ramondre healthy. They added Antonio Gibson. They've got Kendrick Bourne back healthy. Demario Douglas, who's an ascending player. So you could see a world where they have an elite defense and their rookie quarterback is something special, to the point where they're competing in every game, and it comes down to the fourth quarter and whether or not they can win. More so than a team like Arizona, where it's like, well, they can win the occasional shootout, but their defense can't really keep them in the game. And, like if Kyler's not playing to his best level, they're not able to compete, especially against their division, where they have more elite teams. Like San Francisco is like a certified elite playoff team, and it would take injuries for them not to win the division. The Rams are a Super Bowl champion pedigree team, right? And the Seahawks are solid. New England's division is more like, are the Bills still the same team? The Jets, they could disqualify themselves. And the Dolphins, well, we don't know how healthy Tua is going to be at any given moment. And their offensive line and defensive lines kind of suck. So, like, you can see in New England's case where that could actually happen. So, because of their defense, because of Drake May factor, if he is as good as people are saying right now in minicamp and in OTAs, and he can get there by the start of the season, Jacoby maybe can hold it down early. He's not a bad backup. He's definitely better than what they've had in Bailey Zappi. Drake May could maybe take over and really ascend this football team, kind of like Stroud did for the Texans, and end up winning 10 games. That is very possible, okay? So I'm throwing that out there as a possibility. Now, where this team absolutely could implode is just that the quarterback is not good enough. The offense is still lacking skill talent. The offensive line maybe has one or two holes within it that is keeping them and holding them back. And the offensive scheme really hasn't boosted them enough as we would have thought. And maybe certain players on the defense that are aging do regress, okay? That's also possible. So that's the Patriots. Then we've got the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers are super interesting as a worst to first candidate because they've been a really bad football team the last couple of years. Now, this past season, they were atrocious. I mean, really freaking bad. They won 2 games, and I've said it numerous times. They won both those games on game-winning field goals. But here's the thing about the Panthers. Their competition boosts them like 3 spots, right? And there's also a unknown factor to Carolina that makes them intriguing for this list because they have a new coach in Dave Canales. Many Panthers fans have expressed how terrible their coaching was previously with Frank Reich, and I have not heard from a Panthers fan that liked Frank Reich. I did not like the coach before Frank Reich, so coaching has been a big problem there. Can Dave Canales just be the answer that they've needed, right? Like, that's a big deal to me. Defensively, they haven't had bad coaching in Evero. And now they've had a new general manager in the former great linebacker Dan Morgan, who's brought many pieces to this team in many of their biggest holes. I would say offensively at receiver, offensive line at guard, and then even to a certain degree, their pass rush, their defensive line. We'll go through their roster here, but the biggest question mark for the Panthers and their biggest reason for optimism is offensive-minded coach, new coach with a young quarterback who is a first overall pick who enters year 2. Bryce Young, you guys know I'm not that high on him, and I've never been that high on him, dating all the way back to when I watched him play Texas in like week 2 of his senior season in college football. I just didn't really see it, okay? But at the same time, could the people that were truthers of Bryce Young be correct, and do I have to factor that into my analysis? Yes, that's where my lack of bias comes in. I am not biased. When it comes to these things, I can see a world where Bryce Young plays well, especially when you consider that his offensive line should be much better. And actually, on paper, a pretty darn good offensive line. Robert Hunt is an excellent player, and it was a big-time signing, a lot of money. But he's probably worth it when you're talking about Bryce Young, a guy that needs to be able to see over his offensive line, see the middle of the field, and have time to throw from the middle of the pocket. Collapsing pockets give him issues. So a strong interior offensive line is crucial to his success. Damian Lewis, a guy that I've always liked from Seattle, more of a run blocker, kind of a nasty player than a pass rusher, but still very solid in my opinion. Ekwonu, should be excellent. He hasn't quite been there yet. He hasn't quite ascended there yet, but should be excellent. Robert Hunt, a player that, again, I just discussed, like, just vicious, reliable, can play guard or tackle. Again, Brady Christensen now moves to the bench, adds a little bit of depth. Neiman from Green Bay has started there, for a few games. That's also quality depth. You've got Taylor Moton, who's a solid right tackle. Austin Corbett, who played for the Rams, was a really good player in LA, and he's going to be their center this year, you would think. So Adam Thielen was great for them. Way better than I would have thought last year. Like, I thought he was the only guy they could really throw to, and he ended up actually being way better than I would have thought. So he's there as their slot receiver. Xavier Legette stretches the field. He's explosive. He can catch a screen. He can catch a deep ball. Deontay Johnson's a wicked route runner. Now, can he catch the ball reliably? That's a question, but he can get open and separate, something they didn't have last year. And then you still got, Terrace Marshalls, Jonathan Mingos, guys that can fill out that receiver room there. Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks, Miles Sanders, pretty interesting running back room. Brooks, I would think, would be their starter by the end of the year, but he's coming back from an injury. They added a tight end from the draft, also from Texas, right? The Longhorns. Andy Dalton is a solid backup quarterback. Defensively, like, you look at this roster, I mean, if Bryce is good, the offense could be good. It could be good. I mean, you look at it on paper, Xavier Legette, I'm not the biggest fan, honestly. Like, I would have seen him as more of a back-end second-round pick, not a first-rounder. But that's just me, right? I think Deontay Johnson is legit good. I think Adam Thielen could still play. So having Xavier Legette as more of a third receiver is probably, the best case, in my opinion. And just allow him to sprinkle in those big plays. I like the Jadeveon Clowney signing. I think Josie Jewell was a solid signing. Shaq Thompson is still there. Trevin Wallace, I like that draft pick quite a bit. Ashawn Robinson, I've always been a fan of him against the run. Shai Tuttle is still there. Derek Brown is still a beast. DJ Wonham had 2 back-to-back 8-sack seasons. Even a signing like Cam Gill is solid. J.C. Horn, if he plays, is an elite corner. Xavier Woods, Jordan Fuller, solid. Nick Scott, solid safety trio there. A lot of Rams players because obviously Evero came from there as the secondary coach. I'm a big fan of Jordan Fuller. I think he's an excellent, very smart safety. Never really out of position. Dane Jackson's a little underwhelming as a CB2. Troy Hill is a solid nickel back. So the secondary is a little suspect at corner. The pass rush is a little underwhelming, but they've got a lot of pros on defense. A lot of guys that have played in this league, a lot of snaps, a lot of experience. And J.C. Horn and Derek Brown are kind of those elite players that they need. You look at this team, and Tampa, like, I'm not the biggest Todd Bowles head coach guy. Baker could certainly not be the same player post leaving Dave Canales, right? Dave Canales leaving. And then Mike Evans getting older, Chris Godwin getting older, certain aspects of their defense aging, and Carlton Davis leaving. Like, they could get worse. The Saints could be a disaster this year. And then the Atlanta Falcons, Kirk Cousins is an injury risk. Their defense is pretty bad. Like, you can see a world where Carolina could win this division. It's possible. Now, they were horrible last year. It's really hard to see it, but it's definitely possible. All right, so Carolina is at what? Number 8, 7, 6, 5. Number 5. And honestly, I'm talking myself into the possibility actually existing there with Carolina. The 4th team most likely to go worst to first in 2024 is the Chicago Bears. And honestly, I didn't even know the Bears finished last in the NFC North last year. I thought certainly that was the Minnesota Vikings, but they both had the same record at 7-10. So the Bears technically were the last place team in their division, and that was also backed up by the draft order. So the Bears are really intriguing. Now, the problem with Chicago is obviously they have a rookie quarterback, and that's a complete wild card. Caleb Williams could be a phenom as a rookie. He has all the talent in the world, all the confidence, the composure, the superstar nature that everyone believes is going to hit the NFL and it's going to be a home run from day one. But you don't really know how that's going to work out. Is his game going to translate to the NFL the way that we think it might? Right? This is the prospect that is most reminiscent of a Patrick Mahomes style. Of all of the quarterbacks that have come out of college and could maybe play like Mahomes, this is the guy. Right? The backyard nature of his game, the ability to throw from all different arm angles, the power of his arm inside and outside the pocket, the creativity, most importantly, the vision that he sees the game. Caleb could be special. And it could be special in year one in terms of that flavor, that creativity, and what he does to elevate the receivers, the offense, the Bears in general, and you put him alongside the weapons that the Bears have been able to cast aside him, right? In his Hollywood picture, you've got Keenan Allen coming from Hollywood, Los Angeles, the Chargers. You've got, of course, DJ Moore, one of the best receivers in the game. And now a number 1 pick, Rome Odunze. 3 awesome receivers. A very good tight end in Cole Kmet. A running back who they signed with the intention that he can run routes out of the backfield and be explosive, DeAndre Swift. And then you also have other reliable runners like Roschon Johnson as well to complement out of the backfield. You look at the Chicago offense and the potential, it is sky high. But the biggest factor in why I don't have Chicago inside my top 3 is the division. The division? The division. I don't know if I'm German, Swedish, or what I am, but the division is really tough, man. And that's the problem with the Bears. Because you look at, the Vikings. Yeah, the Bears are probably more talented than the Vikings. They're certainly more talented at quarterback, right? But I like the Vikings coaches more. That's another side point, like a small side point. I think Matt Eberflus, I think Shane Waldron. I don't mind either coach. Don't get me wrong. I don't think they're terrible. But in this division, when you compare it to Detroit's coaching staff, you compare it to Green Bay's coaching staff, you compare it to Minnesota's coaching staff, that is going to be the one area where Caleb is going to have to overcome when it comes to comparing himself to Jared Goff and the Lions, when it comes to comparing himself to Jordan Love and the Packers. It does feel like Eberflus and Waldron are steps below Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson. When it comes to Matt LaFleur, right? When it comes to Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, the Vikings have that coaching edge. They've got a ton of skill talent. They've got a really good offensive line. I was prepared to talk about the Vikings as well because I thought they might have been the team in last because Kirk Cousins got hurt. And then you remember that team had their record with their starting quarterback for a large majority of the year missing the season. Their defense was pretty strong. The Vikings are a pretty talented team overall, pretty solid team. They're definitely a good last place team if we're imagining the Bears are going to be better than last, right? And then we look at, Detroit is an NFC championship contender. They nearly beat the 49ers. They nearly represented the NFC last year, and they only got stronger on paper, especially on defense. Their secondary is better. They should be able to handle the Bears a bit better in that aspect. And their defensive line, I'd say, is stronger for sure with DJ Reader and Marcus Davenport. So the Lions are going to be a top dog in the NFC or a top cat in the NFC. And then you look at the Packers, a young ascending football team. And this is the one team where I could see, I think the Packers are going to be very good. But I'm trying to go through the dimensions, right? Go through the universes, go through the simulations where Chicago ends up winning this division. And it could be because Jared Goff might get hurt, or it could be because, I don't know, the Lions defense for whatever reason just doesn't step up to the plate and that offense is somehow fooled or something, right? Or, there's maybe they get injured on the offensive line and that starts to implode and Goff, some of his faults come up like in LA. That could be potentially possible, right? Green Bay, maybe Jordan Love isn't quite as good as we thought. Maybe Matt LaFleur doesn't have a handle of those young playmakers and nobody really steps up to the plate. And maybe the defensive scheme doesn't really work out the way we thought, along with maybe a couple of injuries to the key sides of the football. So that's kind of how you see it happening. It doesn't really have a lot to do with Chicago. Chicago could be pretty good. Chicago could win 10 games and finish third in this division. That's the thing, right? And I think when we look at Chicago, I think the make or break unit of this team is the offensive line. I think the offensive line is pretty good on paper. I liked Darnell Wright coming out of college. I thought that he was a little bit raw in some areas, but I really liked his power game. And I feel like in year 2, he should elevate. I think Nate Davis was a very good signing last year, proved to be pretty good last year. Ryan Bates, the center position in general, Coleman, Shelton, whoever's going to start there, a little bit suspect. And you would like to have a better, more proven center along with a rookie quarterback for sure to call protections and protect that guy. That's a big relationship to have, right? Tevin Jenkins is a solid player at guard, especially really good in the run game. They do struggle a little bit more in the pass game than the run game, which is a difficulty, but Caleb is elusive. Caleb can escape. Caleb can create. And that's the area you hope that he, like Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, elevates the rest of his characters around him. Braxton Jones, he's a good, solid tackle. It's kind of been a good story, but how good is he really is the question. They also drafted a tackle, but he's more of a long-term solution. So the make or break unit is the offensive line, obviously coming down to health, but those 5 seem pretty formidable in my opinion. The defense, I think, could be a little bit worse than expected. A lot of people expecting it to kind of play the way they played at the end of last year, right? But when you really dive into the personnel, this is not a team with amazing pass rushers. They really have Montez Sweat. Jacob Martin comes off the bench in pass rushing rotation snaps. They don't really have a lot. Andrew Billings is a run stuffer, solid signing, but run stuffer, right? Their defensive tackle position's pretty underwhelming. DeMarcus Walker is like a rotation edge defensive tackle, play either one, but not great at one type of guy. TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds are really good in the middle, but again, if your pass rush isn't working, if your D-line isn't dominant, it's hard to be good in the middle of your defense, even at linebacker when you're that good. I think the secondary is somewhat underrated. I think Kyler Gordon played better last year. Jaquan Brisker is one of my favorite young safeties in the league. Kevin Byard, I think, will be solid for them. And Jalen Johnson is elite. So I even like the Jonathan Owens pickup. I think there are certain things that I really like about the defense, but I could see the defensive line regressing, which means a regression for the entire defense, along with the competition they played. It could be tough for Chicago to make their way to the top of this division, considering how much more talented the other teams are in many aspects, along with the coaching edge that they have, and along with they don't have a rookie quarterback. So other than Minnesota, it's hard to imagine the Bears being better than the Lions or the Packers consistently in most outcomes. Could it happen in some? Yes. Is it going to happen where they're better than both? It's unlikely. But if Caleb is as good as he can be, it's possible. So that's why I have them here at number 4. At number 3, I've got the Los Angeles Chargers. And some people may say, Mitch, why do you have the Chargers at number 3? That seems really high. Don't you know that they have the Kansas City Chiefs in their division? And I would say, yeah. But here's the thing. The Chargers are that one team on this list that, other than my number 1 team on this list, which might be a spoiler, they have an elite quarterback. So that is going half the way, right? Yeah, Mahomes is obviously better than Herbert, and Mahomes is a Hall of Famer already, and Mahomes is the guy, and Mahomes is the dude, and Mahomes is the face of the NFL. But what if Jim Harbaugh comes in and all of a sudden elevates the Chargers? The defense is top 10. And the offensive line is really good, and they run the ball. And Herbert is just Herbert. And then the Chiefs, maybe they have a couple injuries. Not even to Mahomes. Let's just say the offensive line's not as good. And because of that, the run game isn't as good. And because of that, Mahomes doesn't have as much time. Maybe Kelsey gets old and he's off on vacation with Taylor Swift half the time. And maybe the defense isn't as good because they lost L'Jarius Sneed. Is this not possible where at least they have the elite quarterback there? And it's what if he outplays Mahomes in a season? Is that impossible? I don't know. I feel like it's possible given what we saw from Mahomes for a majority of last season. So I'm just saying, I think it's possible. But then you just throw into the fact that I think it's more likely that the Chargers win the division because Mahomes misses half the year than Chicago being better than the Lions and the Packers. Both, right? That's kind of the tricks I'm doing here with this list, where I'm okay, what's the likeliness of Mahomes missing, let's say, 6 games? And let's say the Chiefs lose 4 of them. What's the chances that happens? What's the chances he has a Tom Brady 2008 torn ACL in the first week? That's possible, right? Is it not? Manning missed a season, Brady missed a season. So then when you talk about that, then it comes down to, I'm going to take Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh to win this division. Right? I think. Like the Raiders, I like their overall roster more than the overall roster of the Chargers, but I still trust Herbert and Harbaugh to be more consistent and pull out some wins. And I think that's the difference between the Chargers this year and Chargers past years. Chargers past years had all the talent in the world, but you didn't really know what product you were going to get on a weekly basis. Chargers this year we know what the quarterback is, we know what the coach is, we feel like the culture is going to be pretty strong, we feel like the consistency and the toughness and the game plans, they're going to be there. The schemes are going to be solid. But how talented is the team? How good are the receivers? How good's the defense? There's questions about this roster that there haven't been. But let's kind of dive into that, right? So the offensive line, I love the tackles. I think Joe Alt is one of those tackles that's going to be good right away. Maybe not quite Tristan Wirfs level good, but probably pretty good, right? And then you have Rashawn Slater, who is a stud when he plays. Corey Linsley, I don't know what's going on with his health, but Bradley Bozeman has been very good in this scheme, in Greg Roman's scheme in past years, so I'd expect him to be solid. Zion Johnson is a first-round pick, and Jermari, I don't know how to say his name. I've never known. Sayer? Chargers fans, let me know. Sayer? He's a solid run blocker, struggles a little bit in certain areas, but I feel like he's been okay. Right? Even Trey Pipkins as a swing tackle, he's okay. Right? He's been starting. So the O-line is there. They can run the ball. I feel like J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, that will give them enough on the ground to be able to run the ball. It's not elaborate. It's not electric. It's not exciting, but it's good enough. And then the receivers, you kind of wonder, like DJ Chark to stretch the field, big, fast guy. They did draft Ladd McConkey, who I really liked on tape. The question with him is kind of like stability and can he stay healthy? I feel like he's a guy that gets banged up a lot, but he is very quick, explosive, runs great routes, very crisp, good hands. He could be the chain mover, kind of the next Keenan Allen for this team. I wouldn't be surprised. I like Josh Palmer. I think he's better than given credit for. And Quentin Johnston maybe can be something, right? But with Herbert, you expect him to elevate Will Dissly, Hayden Hurst. He will elevate Hayden Hurst, just as Hayden Hurst was elevated with Joe Burrow. Donald Parham, right, as a red zone guy. Ladd McConkey will be elevated as a rookie. You expect these guys to be elevated. But then you look at the defense and you're kind of like, well, the D-line is kind of not very good. I like Morgan Fox. Poona Ford is fine. Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, when they play, are really good. Mack was a beast last year. I wonder if he can play at that level again. He's aging. Joey Bosa, you wonder if he'll ever get back to the level that he used to play at. I actually think their linebackers are a lot better than last year. I think that Henley is going to be a good player. He was a third-round pick last year. I expect him to step up. Junior Colson, I didn't love that pick, but in the third round, I feel it's a solid pick. Denzel Perryman, I think, is a solid linebacker. Nick Nyman is okay. He's fine. So, like, the linebackers are fine. I think that the secondary, the safeties are really good. Gilman and James are both really good, and even JT Woods is solid. Asante Samuel is a ball hawk. Christian Fulton has played well in his career before, and Taylor is But, like, I look at the defense, and I kind of say, like, it's not bad. I could see a world where they're okay. They're formidable, because you think about what they've been in the past. Jesse Minter's the DC. I kind of like that defensive scheme better than Staley's. I feel like they've been too soft in the past. They could be more physical. So I look at the Chargers and I say, I could see a world where they're not pretty, they're not exciting, which is weird to say about the Chargers, but I could see them being a more formidable team if they all get on the same page. So that is a world that could happen. But I could also see a world where they just don't have enough pass catching options. Herbert is just too much on his shoulders and the defense just isn't quite good enough, which is the more likely option. But I don't know, man. The Chargers certainly have the quarterback to get this done, and they're one Mahomes injury away from winning the division, in my opinion. So that's why they're at number 3. My number 2 team is the Tennessee Titans. Tighten up. There's been a lot of Titans fans that have been excited with me and then somewhat upset with me. And it's hard because I'm totally with your emotions, because I feel the same way, Titans fans. Like, I'm there with the Titans, but then I'm also not there. And here's the thing. Like, this is where I can be honest, and this is almost a reason to make this video, is to be honest with these teams that I've been back and forth about. A lot of these teams are on this list. And the Titans are that team where it's like, I kind of like what they did this offseason. I love the Calvin Ridley signing. I love the L'Jarius Sneed trade. I mean, there are not many people that like L'Jarius Sneed more than me, and there are not many people that like Calvin Ridley and L'Jarius Sneed more than me. So that's a big win in my book, right? Do I think Tyler Boyd, his signing's a bit overrated? Sure. Maybe I'm a little bit more lower on that spectrum than other people because Tyler Boyd is a big name. JC Latham, I think that's a pretty good pick. I love the offensive line coach, Callahan, that they're getting. I feel like the overall staff is kind of, I don't know how good Brian Callahan's going to be. I don't know how good Denard Wilson's going to be. I actually kind of think Denard Wilson might be the better coach there in terms of his side of the ball. But Callahan does have experience in Cincinnati with Burrow and that sort of thing. I'm intrigued to see what his offense looks like. I feel like they have a lot of the pieces on offense. Like, you look at this, if you took Will Levis out of this team and you put Josh Allen on this team, I'd be like, they might win the AFC. Like, seriously. I think that's the difference between where I'm at and a lot of Titans fans is like, I think I understand the line of like, well, if Will Levis is good, this team is good. If Will Levis is not good, which is probably more likely, this team isn't going to be good really no matter what. Like, this team could have a really good supporting cast on offense. Even the scheme could be better than I think. And if the quarterback isn't any good, does it really matter? Right? Like, I like the running back. I especially really like Tajay Spears. I'm a big Tajay Spears fan. Tony Pollard, I kind of wonder if he'll ever be the same guy that he was a couple of years ago, because last year he wasn't that good. Right? His stats would say otherwise, but trust me, I had him in fantasy. DeAndre Hopkins, still pretty good last year. Not quite as dominant as he used to be, but still pretty good. I even like Kyle Phillips. I think Treylon Burks can play when he's out there. Westbrook-Akine is a solid depth player. They've got great receivers. Daniel Brunskill, I've always liked from San Francisco. Peter Skoronski is a good player. And, I mean, the right tackle position's a bit suspect. But other than that, the offensive line looks a lot more formidable. Lloyd Cushenberry in the middle, can't forget about him, was a very nice sighting out of Denver. He was very good for Denver last year. Tight end, I think's fine. Okonkwo's a great athlete. I'd like a little bit more in terms of a nuanced player at that position in this offense, but I think they're fine there. And defensively, I'm also a little bit worried about the front. I feel like the front seven is a little bit... I don't love the linebackers. They scare me. Kenneth Murray's pretty bad, in my opinion. Jack Gibbons is kind of an unknown. Cedric Gray is a rookie and kind of slow. I did like the James Williams pick, though. I will say that Arden Key, I've always been a fan of, dating back to when he was drafted. Harold Landry is a good player, but he's coming off injury. Rashad Weaver's a solid depth player. Jeffrey Simmons is a stud. But the thing is, they only really have one stud. I think Tavondre Sweat's overrated. I think Sebastian Joseph Day is not the name you think of. He's not good anymore. So I'm worried about the interior defensive line. I'm worried about the linebacker position. I'm worried about the middle of the field. I'm worried about safeties. Amani Hooker's okay. Maybe good, you could say. Elijah Molden, I kind of like more as a corner, but that's just in my opinion, nickel corner. Roger McCreary, I like their corners a lot. If Chidobe Awuzie is healthy, I think that's a very good 3-corner group. Snead as your number 1, Awuzie as your number 2, and McCreary as your nickel. That's a perfect group in my opinion. But they're missing safety, they're missing linebacker, they're missing D-tackle. Edge is just okay too, because really I'm not sure if Harold Landry is a true number 1 edge rusher, and Key is more of a rotation guy. So I feel like their defense is a little bit worse than their fans think. Their offense could be good, but I just don't know if they have the quarterback. So I look at Titans, and at the end of the day, I kind of think about it, and there's a lot of new here. Quarterback that we're not too familiar with, a lot of new offensive linemen, a lot of new on the coaching staff, some new on the offense, running back, wide receiver, all that stuff. Defense, a lot of new in the secondary. But overall, you think about the potential of this team. The potential is they could win this division. And that's the first one maybe on this list where I'm like, regardless of injuries or anything, they could win this division. If Will Levis is good, they could win this division. I think the Texans are that team, and I pretty strongly feel that they are really, really good. But what if the Texans play closer to last year than the expectation of what they will be this year? If that's the case, the Titans could win this division, right? That's just assuming that the Texans maybe were a little bit fortunate last year. Their players like Nico Collins played better than we ever would have thought. Stroud played better than we ever would have thought. The offensive line, is just not as good as we think it's going to take a step forward, right? Diggs is washed, whatever. Defensively, they just don't take that step. The Titans could maybe be right there, because I think the Colts are kind of in the same boat as Tennessee, where it's like they could be good, but they could be bad. They're in that same boat. And the Jags are kind of like they're mid. Like, I don't see the Jags being great. I don't see the Jags being bad. They're somewhere in the middle. And that's just the way I feel about the Jags. The Titans have the potential where I feel like they could be better than Jacksonville, but they could also be worse than the entire division, period. So they're a tricky one, but that's why I have them at number 2, because their spectrum to me is very large. And a lot of that comes down to Will Levis. I see aspects of Will Levis where I'm like, he's got a strong arm. He's a good athlete. He's a big kid. He can take a hit. He's tough as hell. I think the team buys into him. But he's very erratic. He's very inconsistent. But man, if he's consistent this year, he could be good. So yeah, I just need more on Will Levis. And like I've said, I'm going to be making a video about him at some point because I need to. I need to do the study for my own understanding and confidence about this team when I truly make my predictions at the end of the year. But for now, I have them as the number 2 worst to first team. The number 1 team is obviously the Cincinnati Bengals. This is one of the easiest decisions I've ever made in a rankings video. The Bengals just could be the team that represents their conference in the Super Bowl, and we rarely ever see a team that finishes last in their division that could win the Super Bowl the next year. I think of the 49ers in 2019. That was one of those teams, but there's very few, right? It's usually because of injury, and the Bengals were definitely because of injury. Joe Burrow, right? I think the Bengals would have made the playoffs and would have been pretty good in the playoffs last year. I mean, they did go to San Francisco and knock the Niners out pretty good in that game. So I look at the Bengals, and I think they're better than last year on paper. I think they're just as good as any season we've seen before on paper, and we know that they're more than paper. We've seen their product before. Now, their offensive coordinator's in Tennessee, obviously, as discussed, but I don't think that's going to hurt them too much because Zach Taylor is an offensive guy himself. They still have their defensive coordinator, which is kind of like their bread and butter. Their bread and butter of this football team is truly Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, the defensive coordinator, Big Lou, and head coach Zach Taylor. That's the bread and butter. Everything else is like cherries on top of the Bengal cake, okay? But you look at this team, and obviously other players matter, but I'm just saying to be successful, that's their core. And the offensive line is the best offensive line the Bengals have had with Burrow. Like Trent Brown and Orlando Brown are studs when they are healthy and playing. They are tough, okay? Run game, pass game, trust me, Trent Brown, I mean, he was one of the best tackles in the league last year for my money. He played on one of the worst teams in the league. But he'll miss a couple games. But Amarius Mims can slide right in. Bengals fans are going to be shocked how good Trent Brown is. I mean, I'm just saying. He's really good when he tries. He doesn't try all the time, but he's really good. Ted Karras is solid. Alex Kappa is better than solid. And they've got like good depth, like Cody Ford, Jackson Carman, solid players, right? I always mix his name up. And even Volson should take a step forward this year. I wonder if Mims will actually get into that starting lineup. I don't think he'll play guard, but it's a possibility. The receivers, I think, are kind of underrated because they lost Tyler Boyd. I actually think people are sleeping on just how good T. Higgins is, first of all. But then secondly, Trent Irwin is a pretty good player. He looks not like a good player, but trust me, he's kind of good. Charlie Jones, I also was a big believer in coming out of Purdue last year. Jermaine Burton out of Alabama is an explosive firecracker of a player. And even the kid out of the 6th round, I don't even know how to say his name, is Yeah, the Bengals fans love him too. He's pretty good too. So they've got a lot of depth there. And the tight end, like Mike Gesicki is another receiver. Like, don't sleep on his skill set. He's talented. He can run. He can run routes. He's got great hands. He's a good red zone threat. Tanner Hudson, I liked last year. Drew Sample, solid. And then the running backs, I don't think Joe Mixon leaving is going to hurt quite as much as people think, because I think Chase Brown is real. Jake Browning's a good backup quarterback. We saw that last year, so we know the floor of this team. Even if Burrow misses a couple of games, they're still capable of winning. Their defense, I think, stronger. They did lose DJ Reader, but Chris Jenkins, Sheldon Rankins, and McKinley Jackson should all help in that regard. Their depth on their D-line is very strong with Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, and Miles Murphy, first-round pick. Cam Sample can play. Osai can play. BJ Hill can play. Zach Carter. So they've got depth there. Linebackers have always been good. One of the most underrated tandems the last few years, Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. I love Pratt personally. Cam Taylor-Britt, one of my favorite corners last year, ascending to a true number one player. Von Bell, Geno Stone, Dax Hill, Jordan Battle at safety. One of the better, deeper safety groups in the league. DJ Turner should take a step up this year. I would like them to sign another corner like Stephon Gilmore, but that's still open. Xavier Howard's also out there. Mike Hilton is one of the best nickels in the league for the past 8 years. So the Bengals are really good. If Joe Burrow's playing, they're really good. And to me, the best team in this division, if Joe Burrow plays all 17 games. The Browns are a little bit too inconsistent because their quarterback play isn't good enough. I also think they're going to take a hit with the offensive line play due to Callahan leaving. I also feel like the Steelers, Russell Wilson, that level of quarterback play is not consistent enough, not high enough, not good enough. They're not a good enough offense to win 12 games. I feel like they could win 10, but I don't feel like 12, 13's in the cards like the Bengals. And the Ravens, I feel like they've lost people on the offensive line. They've lost people on defense. They lost the best defensive coordinator in the league. They lost edge rushers. So, to me, I think the Bengals are that team where they're most likely to go worst to first in 2024. Let me know your opinion in the comment section below. It's Mitch. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.